See, this is what happens when you have a random word generator for a brain. You think you have a vision for a neat, concise script idea laid out all nice and professionally, but then your various mental illnesses come to check up on you when you least expect. And the next thing you know, you've turned what was supposed to be a 3 to 5 minute shitpost into a 12-minute mini thesis on the Venn diagram of human imagination and mating habits. And you haven't even made it to the main point of your original concept. But you know what they say, when life is lemons, get yourself a tiny umbrella. I think that's how that expression goes. But anyway, you came here for round 2 of pretty alternative girl clickbait, and that's what I intend to give you. So last time we talked about building yourself so you don't disappoint your soon-to-be partner, and I left you off with a sample of the different forms an uxer may take. And here, before we go any further, I'd like to address a pair of contentions that came up in the comments of part 1. First, the questionable link between psychological and/or behavioral traits to physical ones. As I admitted in the other comment section, this isn't nearly as hard and fast a rule of actual biology as I'm making it out to be. After all, it's not called random mutation for nothing. However, by simple logic, there must be at least some amount of overlap between physicality and psychology, as what would be the evolutionary sense in giving an organism physical traits and not the cognitive capacity to make use of them? And yes, before anyone comments, I know vestigial limbs and organs are a thing. Like I said, use it or lose it is more an ideological axiom than an ontological decree, which is why I'm not asserting it as fact. The only reason I'm bringing it up at all is because it makes this little thought project more interesting, as it discourages me from pulling the old playground one-upmanship card of, yeah well, my hero has every superpower. And now for the second issue, that of us, humans, being genetically incompatible with fantasy races such as elves, dwarves, tieflings, and so forth. The first and most impactful point to make here is that a species is generally defined by whatever organisms can produce viable offspring, meaning that can itself survive long enough to reproduce. However, this line isn't so perfectly set as you might have been taught in your high school biology class, since certain species we would otherwise regard as separate can, in fact, bring forth offspring, albeit unviable in that it generally can't itself reproduce for being sterile, and also usually coming with a litany of health complications and morbidities, which often lead to a massively reduced lifespan compared to its parents. See examples such as the liger, the coy wolf, the zonkey, the growler bear, among others. And then, of course, we have evidence of interbreeding between early humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. It is also worth noting that the parent species of all the above examples were members of the same genus, hence their being even loosely compatible. Second, and perhaps more controversially, the word race tends to be used interchangeably to mean either genetic diversity within a species, as well as to refer to the species overall, such as how the human race refers to all humans collectively, while a race refers to a specific ethnic subset. This is important because, say, if an elf is taxonomically of the same genus as humans, then we could, with some difficulty, reproduce with one. It's just that whatever offspring came of this union would most likely be genetically unstable and would almost certainly be infertile. Although, given the fact that half elves, half orcs, and half dragons exist, you might say this nullifies my argument outright. But as I said last time, most of these hybrids are facilitated by some variably hand-wavy version of magic. Granted, some of these are executed with far more intelligence than others, but they all suffer from the same fatal malady that makes them unsuitable for my purposes. That being that magic, by its very nature, is a force that exists to break the rules of nature. Ipso facto, it would allow me to cheat. And that's specifically what I'm trying to avoid with this little side errand of mine. So, I'm going to go ahead on the assumption that unless something is explicitly stated to be human or directly related to humans, it's of a fundamentally different genome, and thus is impossible to procreate with without outside aid. And so know that, from now on, whenever I say the word race, I'm referring to organisms whose genetic variance is mostly cosmetic, and thus are perfectly interbreedable. Meanwhile, by species, I mean an organism with whom we'd have only limited genetic compatibility, and with any category of genus or above, we'd have absolutely none whatsoever. With that all out of the way, let's get on to the real point of this video. Now, obviously, I can't in reasonable time give a detailed psychoanalysis on each and every conceivable Waifu type, race, and species. So, for right now, you're going to have to be satisfied with a broad overview of each of the 9 principal boxes I laid out until I get my Evo Psych series off the ground. And on that note, as it only makes sense to go about this thing in reading order, I might as well start off this bizarro expedition with the internet's favorite form of exotic waifu, the Beast Girl, aka the furry GF. This one's fairly self-explanatory. I went over both in part 1 of this series and in my other loose string of videos from way back in the day dissecting the psychological underpinnings of furry fascination. An FGF combines the most desirable traits, from the male's perspective, of a human woman, that being mainly her feminine form and sexual assets, with those of the man's favorite animal, be it a dog, a cat, a horse, a cow, or even a mother fudging dragon. And I suppose it's here that I should address the third glaring elephant in the room. Not only are these categories of waifu not mutually exclusive on an individual basis, but also on a categorical group level as well. Using dragons as a specific example, dragons are as often depicted as ravaging monsters, and so fall into the monster GF category, as they are lordly celestials, making them members of the Fae class or hyper-exceptional animals. This all, in my view, perfectly illustrates the greatest strengths and advantages of this entire top row of waifu boxes. Since their potentiality span the entire breadth, reach, and scope of both nature and fiction, this effectively means the complete extent of conceptual reality are hidden therein for your explicit pleasure. Everything from cats to wolves to giants to vampires to literal unicorns. And if you're not really into the whole Call of the Wild thing, you can dial the human-animal ratio up or down to your choosing with a hybrid. Truly, the only limitations here are the length of your own creativity, or bravery, whichever's your stronger stat. Now, on to the second row. Much like the first set, variety is this group's bread, butter, wine, and spice cabinet. However, the individual boxes do each sport their own unique spectra of variance, which we'll now discuss in very brief terms. First up, exotic mostly refers to hominoid extraterrestrials, which fiction seems to sport a surprising assortment of. No prizes for guessing why. From Togruta to the Navii, from Vulcans to the Tau and Eldar. And I'm sure you can find Rule 34 content for literally any other fictional species you can name, sentient or not, humanoid or not, if you really hate yourself that much. Now, recall what I said last time about how sexual interest is the key which turns an ordinary friendship into a romance. For anyone who wants to argue with me on that point, explain to me why the term for a non-reciprocity of coital intention is being put in the friend zone. Well, would an alien have a desire to procreate with a human? Perhaps not in the regular carnal sense, no, but as someone astutely noted in the comments of my old video psychoanalyzing furries. If and when humanity ever encounters aliens, once we get past the whole "take me to your leader and all your base are belong to us" thing, the very first thing someone's going to do is try to have sex with them. And if the aliens share enough of our human anatomy to be appealing to our inner monkey's eye, then I see no reason why their psychology shouldn't also be similar enough to our own to share our curious desires. At least to some extent. Plus, even if they don't quite do it for you in that way, or vice versa, a major potential boon to consider would be the possible use of their advanced alien tech to circumnavigate that pesky genome barrier. Just saying. On a bit more earthly note, fantasy femies draw on most of the same psychological wells as before to achieve many of the same results. And while Tolkien may have been the progenitor of the modern fantasy genre's general taxonomy, in my opinion we truly have Gary Gygax to thank for the most popular, or at least prolific, profiles of the major races. And let's be honest, for as much of a creative genius as the old professor was, his creation was explicitly designed to be a mythology for Britain, and so derives its mythological roots mainly from Norse and Catholic basins, with perhaps a smattering of Celtic and Gallic influences thrown in on the subtextual level, whereas Dungeons & Dragons not only takes healthful scoops with nearly every fantastical ladle under the sun, it stirs them all into a single collective pot, which not only makes my task here significantly easier, but also offers us a window through which to conduct future speculative analysis, which is a bridge I've already begun construction on in these videos if you want to get a head start on that strange journey. But before we go anywhere, one last potentially snagging nail I think I need to hammer down, as this is also the section wherein would be found all sorts of supernatural beings, angels, demonesses, devils, goddesses, and eldritch entities. Let me just save us all some time and say that if you're the kind of man who hates drama, and who likes to know where his soul is at all times, then in every possible way, you don't want none of that. Now let's move on. Honestly, everything from here on is pretty much just supplemental garnish, as each of the next 4 slots aren't so much a class unto themselves as a personality type, with the obvious exception of the MILFs, or mothers I'd like to fornicate with, which, While usually used to connotate a woman who retains an abnormal amount of sex appeal beyond her youth, if you read it literally, it really only means a woman who's had a baby. So, to be more technically precise, if you're looking for an older woman without the hassle of parental investments, have no fear, for in the infinite vaults of internet wisdom, there hath come to us verily a remedy for this linguistic loophole. The hag, which, according to the Urban Dictionary, apparently refers to any woman over 30, whether they've ever been pregnant or not. And as for the rest, if you've been around the block more times than the clock has digits, you can probably work these out for yourself. But as this is an explanation video, very quickly, Starbrights are just Starfire from Teen Titans, Dark Ones are Raven from the same, and Tomboys are just a man with tits. Now, I debated whether or not to throw Femboys and Futanari in here as well, but ultimately I decided against it, as there's nothing I can say on them that hasn't already been said by somebody else, and also I don't want to risk getting this video age restricted. So just this once, I'm going to play it safe and tell you to go look up Professor Lando or Gabfer for more information on that particular stony subject. And while you're at it, I'd also recommend you look up a guy by the name of Unhinged Knight, as his series on waifu smashability is directly responsible for this series' existence. But in any case, that'll about do us for another bit. Next time I'll start mining the individual blocks, starting off with the speculative psychology of the furry variety paramour. So if that interests you, you know all the things to do. Hit that like and notification button, subscribe, become a member for early access to content, and also check out my books on Amazon if you're a fan of my writing style and habits. And until next time, as always, stay safe, stay sane, and remember to keep your mind open, never empty. Peace be upon you.